Hey, it's Sean from the Commander's Brew. These are the new Commander decks for the year. This is it, the big show, the grand finale. It's not a finale, nothing's ending. It's new Commander decks. Let's get to it. Okay, I don't want to waste any time. This is a big deal. This is the yearly release of Commander decks. We got 5 of them. They've all got a bunch of commanders. They've all got a bunch of new cards in them. I'm going to break them down by deck instead of just jumbled up together. Tell you what each deck's about, tell you some cool reprints, some cool new cards in the commanders. You decide which one you want to get if you're not getting all 5 of them. How can you resist? Money. Money is how you resist. The Cabaretti deck, that's the Naya deck, is Cabaretti Cacophony, and it's all about going wide. It seems good too. They give us good reprints like March of the Multitudes, Convoke on a go wide deck, just makes a billion tokens, instant speed is key, Aura Mutation, removal, and more creatures. And something like Champion of Lamphold is a must include for a go wide deck because it's not really hard to make this thing so big that your whole team is effectively unblockable. There's a couple of nice reprints in here too. Path to Exile, Lizard's Thanks, Beastmaster Ascension was getting pretty pricey. It's almost up to $10. It'll be cheaper now though. An Idol of Oblivion is a colorless card, but is it the best white card draw spell that there is? I mean, drawing a card just for tapping it every turn is easy when you're making a million tokens. Yeah, it looks like a good deck. They've given us a lot of cool pieces for a go wide deck. Kudos. And let's talk about the new commanders. The star of the show is Kit Kanto Mayhem Diva. 4-mana commander, nice price, 3/3 cat bird druid for all your bird druid tribal decks. So enters, you make 1 green and white citizen creature token, not bad, but then there's some political stuff going on. We should be able to make enough creatures that tapping 2 of them each turn shouldn't be that big of a deal, and controlling how combat works is a fun thing to do. Or you could put Fabine, Boss's Confidant at the front, or in the 99, either way, giving all your creature tokens haste is incredible. Like if you make 1 8/8 haste beast of some sort, okay, that's 1 creature, but your opponents don't always know how many creatures you're going to spit out in token form, if they're going to be pumped or whatever, so they just have no way of knowing what's coming. A little bit of parley, your opponents might draw a couple cards, but you're either going to get more creatures or your creatures are going to get really big. Again, with an army full of tokens, this is a strong commander. Each deck also gives us a commander that is 1 fewer colors. In this case, it's a Selesnya card, 1 green white for Bess, Soul Nourisher. Thanks, Bess. I feel nourished. It's all about little creatures. 1/1s come in, Bess gets bigger, and Bess makes all the 1/1s bigger themselves. And I want to highlight a couple of new cards that I think are a little bit interesting from the deck. These are the ones that you might want to consider about ordering if you don't want to get the whole deck. I'm always interested in a card that can make tokens at instant speed, especially with an X in the casting cost, but this is also one of those instant speed, give your whole team indestructible cards. And the fact that we can cast it for 2 mana instead of the typical 3 that these things cost, make it a surprisingly versatile card. I think this is going to go in a lot of decks. Every deck gets a confluence. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but in all cases, you get to cast the same mode more than once, and you get 3 of them. And in this case, I'm interested in that first one, making a token copy of a creature that gets haste, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. We're not in blue, so making a bunch of copies usually has to rely on those red enchantments that kind of do 1 every turn, or we got to jump through a bunch of hoops. But being able to get 3 at once, we can probably put together some pretty devastating moves with this. And having Artifact or Enchantment Exile as a bonus, I'll take it. Let's move on to the Esper deck, otherwise known as Obscura Operation. This is a deck that's all about kind of sneaking creatures in, dealing combat damage, getting effects that way, drawing cards. It's a lot of interesting moving pieces. I have to admit, it has a pretty cool identity for an Esper deck. Looter Ilkor is a great example of what this deck wants to do. It has Shadow, which kind of means unblockable unless there's another Looter Ilkor on the board for some reason. It deals damage, you loot, draw a card, then discard a card. This kind of effect goes really nicely with Chasm Skulker, getting really huge from all the extra cards we're going to be drawing, and it's a little bit like Wrath Protection. Unless they exile him, we're going to turn him into a bunch of squid tokens. And they reprinted Quiet as Spike for us. It's a nice little equipment. It's a bit pricey to equip, but having a player's life total is no joke. And they gave us some pretty nice reprints. It's all about attacking and sneaking damage in, so of course that's kind of like ninjas. Fallen Shinobi was pretty pricey. They give us another one, so now it's down to like $5 and dropping, I can only assume. Swords to Plowshares, gotta love those 1 mana white exile a creature spells. And Rexiel the Risen Deep, another $10+ card that's sure to come down. Wizards, thanks. And who's in charge of the Obscura Operation? For the deck anyway. Kami's Obscura Oculus. And Kami's just supports what the deck's doing. Any attacking creature can't be blocked, check, and make a smaller creature double striking until end of turn. It's not always what you want to do. I want to give the big creature double strike. If I can't make the smaller creature unblockable, the double strike may not matter that much, but I've got other ways to make things unblockable in the deck. Tivit, Seller of Secrets. Besides having a really creepy human face on a Sphinx body, I know that's how Sphinxes are. It just looks weird. This is our vote commander. Getting extra votes. Those old vote cards where everyone voted in whatever side won, something happened. But there's a lot of more modern vote decks where every vote gives you something, whichever way they go. So you just get 2 votes, so you get to do double of the thing you want. Highlighted in his combat trigger. When he deals damage, everyone's got to vote for something that gives you a thing, and you get to vote twice. Do you want 2 treasures? Cool. You want 2 clues? Cool. 1 of each? Done. Plus what everyone else gives you. And there's always another commander with 1 fewer colors, as I said, and this is Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer. Dimir costs 1 less to cast for all the different mana values. I love a discount on my commander, and it sort of gives us all your spells madness. Whenever you discard a non-land card, you can cast it from your graveyard. I'll take it. I think one of the cool new cards from this deck is Lethal Scheme. 4 mana for a destroy creature or planeswalker is not great, but the fact that we can convoke it means we can cast this card for 0 mana. Any spell that can be 0 mana cost is worth looking at. In Too Deep. I just love the flavor. You turn anything into a clue, or a creature or a planeswalker technically. We've seen this kind of effect before, but having split second means no one can sack it or do anything weird from it. It's going to be a clue. And this is the highlight of the deck, and quite frankly, probably the highlight of the whole set of commander decks. Smuggler's Share. This is the white card we all designed a bunch of years ago when we all started complaining about how white didn't have any good card draw. This is the card we all thought of. So I think that proves it takes them about 5 years from a card to go from design to actually coming out. Someone gets greedy with putting lands out, we get a treasure, which is ramp. It's temporary, but it's pretty good. I believe the card I designed would have had you search up a plains, but I'll take this card. As a single, it's already selling for almost $30. It wouldn't surprise me if this isn't the card from the set that goes for $50. The old Dockside Extortionist effect. Next up is the Riveteers Rampage. This is the Jund deck, and I think this is my pick for my favorite deck of the 5. The main commander is Henzi Toolbox Torre. I love nicknames on a Magic card. Gives all your creatures Blitz, and it makes it 1 cheaper every time you cast your commander, but since your commander's out for that to happen, it's always at least 1 cheaper. And just as a reminder, with all Blitz cards, you're going to sack them at the end of the turn, and you will draw a card when they die, even if they don't die this way. This deck's about sacrificing things. There's lots of cool ways to do it. It's kind of the theme, building things up, tearing things down, a little bit of chaos. I like it. The Beamtown Bullies is pretty interesting. So the fact that it has haste means you can do this the turn it comes down. But you can't do it on your turn because it only works on opponents' turns. But you get to put something from your graveyard under their control, and it's goated, and it has haste, so it'll have to attack someone else that turn. We're probably just going to put some of the biggest and baddest creatures in our graveyard by cheating them in there and then just goading them around the table. Seems like a fun thing to do. And the third commander that is missing the black in the color identity is Jolene the Plunder Queen. It encourages attacking around the table by giving players treasure tokens. And when you make a treasure token, you make that many +1. Pretty good. And sacking a bunch of treasures to put a bunch of counters on Jolene is a nice bonus. If this is our commander, we can obviously try to make it big enough to kill someone with commander damage, but I think I'm most likely to just use those treasures to ramp out brutal threats. There's quite a few new cards from this deck that I'm especially drawn to. Weathered Sentinels. I mean, it's a lot of keywords on an artifact. I think there's a few decks that are just interested in something with this many keywords on it. Any of the Odricks, really? It's going to deter a lot of attacks because if anybody does attack me, now I get to attack back with a 5/8 indestructible Vigilance Trample. A lot of stats for 3 mana. I think Bellowing Mauler is interesting because it does put your opponents in a position where they have to make a choice, and that's never great when your opponents get to choose, but The fact that they can't sacrifice a token creature, it has to be non-token, that makes this interesting to me. Protection Racket is another similar spell where it gives our opponents choices, but it's a tough choice. They either got to pay a bunch of life or give you the card. Tough choices. I like giving my opponents tough choices, even if it's not strategically optimal. Reign of Riches, giving our spells cascade if we cast them with treasure tokens. This deck does everything that I like. And it's the first spell each turn, so obviously I'm going to do something on my turn, but I'm going to save an instant to get an extra cascade trigger on one of my opponent's turns. And I love encouraging combat around the table, and Turf War is fascinating. So everybody gets a contested counter on a land. I pick the lands, but I have to pick one of my own as well. Now it's like a weird pseudo-monarch thing where people are attacking people to steal their lands. And I'm probably going to put it on cool lands that my opponents control to really make it enticing. I might just put it on a simple mountain of mine so my land is less appealing to take. I mean, I'll take land where I can get it. A free land's a free land, but this is going to be pretty chaotic. I saved the reprints for a little bit later because I wanted to give you a picture of what the deck was all about by telling you about some of these cards. But they've given us a great reprint in Avenger of Zendikar, just making a bunch of little tokens. This card gets reprinted once in a while and it always goes back up in price. It's like $5 or $6 now. That'll probably come down, but it'll go back up. Get this card when it's cheap. Blasphemous Act, yes, keep reprinting this, keep the price low. And Chaos Warp is probably the most thematic card of this whole deck. It's just what this deck's all about. And again, another good reprint that we need them to keep reprinting. So Wizards, thanks. Deck seems fun. That's my pick. But maybe that's not your style. Maybe you're more of the spell slinger, old school vampire types. Well then, you'll be interested in Maestros Massacre. This deck is all about casting spells, and it all centers around the Maestros mechanic of casualty, which lets us copy spells when we sacrifice a creature with some kind of minimum power. And hello, the Painter. We're going to have to figure out a way to make a bunch of creatures, but the first instant or sorcery spell we cast has casualty too. So if we can make a bunch of creatures and sacrifice them every time we cast a spell, that seems pretty good. Looks like a job for a Talrand the Sky Summoner. Parness the Subtle Brush goes nicely with Anello. Gives everything we have a little bit of ward, sort of. I mean, it doesn't say ward, but they have to pay for a life to target stuff. And when we copy spells, we get to give a copy to an opponent who chooses new targets. Very political. And we got a legendary Phoenix for the first time in Cyrix, Carrier of the Flame. We're missing the blue on this one, but if a creature card leaves our graveyard, target Phoenix deals damage to any target. And when other Phoenixes die, this Phoenix comes back out of the graveyard. This is kind of a super Phoenix, and it rises from the ashes when other Phoenixes die, who will eventually also rise from the ashes. This deck loves ashes. This is the one deck in the 5 that gets Lightning Greaves as a reprint, which is nice to have. I do wish they would put it in more than one deck, though. And as a Spellslinger deck, we got access to cards like Ponder, Bedevil, just solid staples in a Spellslinger deck. Good removal, good cantrips, good card draw. They put together some good decks. There's some exciting new cards too in this deck. Extravagant Replication. It's a 6-mana do-nothing enchantment, which is always something to be wary of, but at the beginning of your upkeep, getting any non-land permanent as a copy token, that's a pretty strong ability. I mean, ultimately, I want to figure out a way to copy this via other means, and then use the other one to make copies of the first one until I have about 6 or 7 extravagant replications, and then I shall go ham. Maestro's Confluence lets us do the same thing more than once, as all the confluences do. I'm interested in the goad each creature target player controls. If we do that 3 times, that's the same as Disrupt Decorum, which is a mono red sorcery. But that's why I think the first mode's on here, because we can get Disrupt Decorum back from our graveyard and keep goading the table. And commander decks tend to have good cards in graveyards, so Flawless Forgery is sure to get a powerful instant or sorcery, and being able to copy it without spending extra mana is what's interesting here. A 3-power creature is meaningful, so it is a significant cost for your sacrifice, but not paying mana is the key here. Okay, we've got one more deck to cover, and that's the Bant deck, aka the Brokers. This one's all about counters. So many counters. Bit of a counter soup, if you will. Different types of counters, but naturally that leans us towards proliferating. I think Broker's Confluence is a great example because one of the modes we can choose more than once is Proliferate. Triple Proliferate for 5 mana is pretty impressive. That can do some real work. Planeswalkers, artifacts with charge counters, lots of cool stuff. And just as an example of what the deck's all about, I think Bribe Taker is a good example card. 6 mana 6/6 with Trample is fine, but it gets an extra counter based on the variety of counters that you have. And if you have some negative counters, like a -1/-1 or something, you just get to trade that in for a +1/+1. So we're probably looking at like an 8/8 or a 9/9 creature with a bunch of extra things on it. That's kind of the theme of the deck. Lots of different counters and lots of different stuff to do with them. And the front-facing commander is a good example of this. Perry the Pulverizer. Whoever made the name for this card, another home run. Perry the Pulverizer enters with a shield counter going somewhere, and there's a bit of a Voltron thing, so when Perry attacks, you're looking at variety of tokens. Different kinds of tokens gives the creature the pump. Cross is interesting, a little bit of a political angle. If you noticed, all the decks have a little bit of a political thing going on. You have to put a shield counter on an opposing creature, but it has to attack. The fact that it gets trampled means it's not really meaningful to chump with a 1/1, although here it might be to get rid of the shield counter, but I'm not sure if opponent A would be willing to sack a token as a chump to take away the shield counter that I gave player B. They might just agree to take all the damage, and now my opponent has a creature with a shield counter that they could come at me next turn. Unless I put another shield counter on it. Just keep shielding up a creature. Dangerous. And there's an Azorius new legendary as well. That's a Denry Klin, Editor-in-Chief. I have to assume the text that is not on the card, that he's always looking for photos of Spider-Man. But either way, he enters with a choice of a few counters, and whenever a new creature comes in, you put the same number and kind of counters on that creature. So we're going to want to look for ways to put additional variety of counters on Denry Klin, and then every new creature comes in with all of those counters. That seems very powerful. We got a couple of cool new cards I want to talk about, of course. Earlier I alluded to that classic 3 mana indestructible spell that gives your whole team indestructible. This is that, sort of. I mean, you get the shield counter with addendum, so you can't do it on someone else's turn, but if you are able to, you put a shield counter on something, and then you put one of those shield counters on everything else you own. If you can get another shield counter down, this does work at instant speed. And although I haven't talked about them, there's all those new kind of counters that came from the Ikoria set, like lifelink counters and vigilance counters. Those things can be copied too. Pretty impressive. Resourceful Defense is interesting because it doesn't specify the type of permanent or what kinds of counters. So for 5 mana, I can move all the loyalty off of one planeswalker to another planeswalker and ultimate it right away. It's a tall order to cast a planeswalker and pay the 5 as well, but this isn't a mono white deck. We got green in here. We can probably afford it. This deck isn't the most exciting one for reprints. There's a couple of interesting ones, but I just think there hasn't been that much demand for weird kind of counters, so a lot of the cards aren't super pricey. Slippery Bogbonder is about $5, which is pretty good. You know, slapping down a hexproof token's nice. This is another token I'd like to copy. Now everything else is going to get hexproof tokens in this deck, which seems pretty good. They gave us another printing of Devoted Druid, which did get pricey because of an infinite combo. I mean, you can put -1/-1 counters on it to get more mana, but then if you slip in a Vizier of Remedies, you don't actually get the -1/-1 counters, which means you can do that infinity times for infinity green mana. Those are the decks, all 5 of them. I already told you, the Riveteers Revenge is my favorite for sure, but they all have very strong themes, and I think they put a lot of good cards in there. If I was to make these decks from scratch, a lot of the nice staple removal is in there too. I think they did an excellent job. There's a little bit of a politics angle for all of them, which tells me that they probably play together fantastically. I suspect this is the kind of set where you're going to want to keep them together for a little while, play them against each other untouched before you start modifying them. Or sadly, a little part of me dies every time I completely scrap a Commander Precon and use it for parts. But let me know in the comments which deck is your favorite and why. And as always, thanks for being you. The world's a better place for it. See you next time.